There is a force greater than words, more powerful than any argument, and more disarming than anger. It is silence. Those who seek to manipulate, belittle, or provoke you do so with one goal in mind: to feed their own ego. They crave your reaction. They want to see you defend yourself, explain yourself, or engage in a battle of words. They want to believe they have power over you, but here's the truth. Your silence will break their ego more than any words ever could. The ego is fragile, yet it pretends to be indestructible. It thrives on opposition, on the energy of resistance. The moment you refuse to engage, you strip it of its power. Silence is not weakness. It is the ultimate show of strength. It takes immense self-restraint to remain silent when your instincts scream for you to respond. But in that moment of restraint, you rise above the battle, and those who sought to challenge you, are left wrestling with their own inadequacies. Every great leader, every wise thinker, every successful individual has mastered this art. They know that not every battle is worth fighting, not every insult is worth responding to, and not every opinion deserves a reply. When you refuse to react, you force the other person to reflect. Your silence leaves them questioning themselves. Did I say the wrong thing? Did I go too far? Why aren't they responding? And that moment of doubt is where their ego begins to crumble. You see, silence does something no argument can. It creates space. Space for truth to reveal itself. Space for the other person to hear their own words echo back at them. Space for you to remain unshaken while their own insecurities rise to the surface. They expected a fight. They expected a reaction. Instead, they are left with nothing but their own reflection staring back at them. True confidence does not seek validation. It does not beg for approval. It does not chase recognition. When you are confident in who you are, you do not need to explain yourself to anyone. Your silence speaks louder than any speech. It declares that you are in control, that you are unmoved by petty provocations, and that you refuse to stoop to their level. And so, the next time someone tries to rattle you, tries to undermine you, tries to provoke a reaction out of you, pause, breathe, let them talk, let them argue, let them try, and then say nothing. Watch as their ego begins to unravel. Watch as their need for dominance crumbles under the weight of their own expectations. You have already won, because silence is not just the absence of words, it is the presence of unshakable power. Silence carries a weight that words often cannot match. It is a force that unsettles, disorients, and even intimidates those who thrive on argument, confrontation. When people seek conflict, they do so with the expectation of engagement. They want a response, a reaction, an emotional display that confirms their influence over you. But when you choose silence, you deny them the satisfaction they crave. You refuse to participate in their game, leaving them frustrated and confused. The most powerful individuals in history have understood this principle. They knew that silence has the ability to shift the dynamics of any situation. When faced with criticism, mockery, or provocation, those who remain silent exude an aura of confidence and self-control. They do not allow themselves to be pulled into meaningless debates or petty squabbles because they recognize that engaging in such conflicts only empowers the other party. Silence forces the instigator to confront their own words without interference. It creates a vacuum where their voice is the only sound, making them question whether they have gone too far or if their words hold any real weight. It removes their ability to feed off your energy, leaving them to deal with their own emotions instead. They expect resistance, but when they are met with silence, their strategy collapses. In every interaction, people seek validation, whether consciously or unconsciously. Those who provoke or challenge you are often doing so because they need proof that they matter, that their words carry significance, that they can control or influence others. But when you respond with silence, you rob them of that validation. You communicate without speaking that their words are insignificant to you, and nothing shatters a fragile ego more than being ignored. Silence is not submission. It is a form of power that demands control over one's emotions. It is the ability to recognize that not every statement requires a response, and not every battle is worth fighting. It is a declaration that you are not easily swayed, not easily provoked, and certainly not someone who can be manipulated into reacting. When silence is used with intention, it can be one of the most profound tools for dismantling the ego of those who seek to control you through their words. The ego is a hungry beast, constantly seeking nourishment through dominance, validation, and control. It thrives on opposition, drawing strength from the reactions it provokes. When someone with a fragile ego attempts to belittle, argue, or manipulate, they do so with the expectation that their words will trigger a response. Their sense of power is tied directly to your engagement. They need you to defend yourself, to retaliate, to acknowledge their influence. But when you refuse to react, when you meet their provocation with silence, you disrupt their entire strategy. The moment you withhold your response, you create an imbalance. The ego-driven mind anticipates resistance, an argument, a display of emotions, anything that confirms its own importance. But silence offers none of these things. It leaves the instigator stranded in their own assumptions, forcing them to question their words, their motives. They are left standing alone in the conversation they created, speaking only to themselves. Silence forces the mind to reflect, often in ways that words cannot. It removes distractions, leaving only the raw truth of the situation. When someone insults you and you say nothing, they are left to hear their own voice echo back at them. The lack of response creates a mirror in which they must confront their own insecurities. They start to wonder if they were wrong, if they overstepped, if their words truly held the weight they believed they did. The ego demands external reinforcement. It needs others to react, to acknowledge, to fuel its sense of superiority. But when met with silence, that reinforcement vanishes. The individual is left wrestling with their own thoughts, their own doubts. Without resistance, their own words become meaningless. Their attempt at control powerless. The silence does not merely deny them attention, it actively dismantles the very foundation of their ego. Control is not about how loudly you speak or how forcefully you argue. It is about how well you manage your own emotions in the face of provocation. The ability to remain silent when others expect a reaction is the ultimate display of self-mastery. It demonstrates a level of control that few possess, a quiet power that unsettles those who seek to dominate through words. When someone attempts to provoke you, they are not just testing your patience. They are trying to see if they can dictate your emotions. But silence sends a clear message. They do not have that power over you. Most people react impulsively. They feel the need to defend themselves, to prove a point, to make their voice heard. But reacting on impulse only plays into the hands of those who seek control. They rely on your emotional response to validate their actions. They want you to get angry, to argue, to explain yourself. Because the moment you do, they know they have influenced your state of mind. Your reaction confirms that their words have weight. Silence, on the other hand, removes that satisfaction. It strips away their ability to manipulate the situation. It tells them without a single word that their attempts to control your emotions have failed. It forces them to confront the unsettling truth that their words do not affect you as they had hoped. They find themselves speaking into emptiness with no fuel to sustain their ego-driven battle. In that moment, the power shifts. What was meant to be an attack becomes a revelation, one that exposes their own need for validation. They may try harder, raising their voice, using harsher words, seeking any sign of a reaction. But when they are met with nothing but silence, they are left with only their own insecurities echoing back at them. and that realization is far more powerful than any argument you could have given them. Silence has a way of forcing people to confront themselves. Words create noise, distractions, and defenses, allowing individuals to hide behind arguments, justifications, and blame. But when you remove those distractions, when you refuse to engage, explain, or defend, what remains is the raw, unfiltered truth. Those who thrive on ego-driven conflict rely on external validation to maintain their illusion of superiority. They seek reactions, push for engagement, and provoke responses, all in an effort to reinforce their own self-imposed. But silence denies them that reinforcement, leaving them alone with their own thoughts. When someone speaks with arrogance, cruelty, or manipulation, they expect resistance. They are prepared for a verbal battle, equipped with arguments and comebacks. But when you respond with silence, you disrupt that expectation. They are left with nothing to push against, nothing to fight, nothing to validate their aggression. In that vacuum, they are forced to reflect not just on the situation, but on themselves. The absence of resistance makes them question whether their words had any real power to begin with. The most profound lessons in life are often learned in silence. People rarely change when confronted directly. They become defensive, protective of their ego, unwilling to acknowledge their faults. But when they are left alone with their own words, with no one to argue against, no one to oppose them, they are forced to hear themselves. And in that moment, they may realize something they never would have admitted in a heated exchange. Perhaps they were wrong. Perhaps they were unkind. Perhaps their words carried more insecurity than strength. Silence acts as a mirror, reflecting back a person's own words and actions without distortion. It compels them to face the truth they might otherwise avoid. Some will become uncomfortable, some will grow frustrated, and some will even lash out, desperate to fill the void left by your silence. But no matter how they react, one thing is certain. Their ego will feel the weight of that silence. It will begin to crack under the pressure of its own emptiness, because without validation, without reaction, without control over another, the ego has nothing left to feed on. People expect conflict to follow a predictable pattern. An attack met with a counterattack, an argument met with resistance, a challenge met with defense. This is the cycle that ego-driven individuals rely on. They count on the idea that if they provoke you, you will respond. They assume that if they push hard enough, you will engage, giving them the satisfaction of control over your emotions. But silence is the great disruptor. It breaks the rhythm, confuses their strategy, and leaves them with an uncomfortable truth. They have no real power over you. The unexpected holds immense power. When someone is prepared for a battle of words and is instead met with nothing, their confidence wavers. The silence is unsettling, because it forces them to face something they did not anticipate. Their own words, their own insecurities, their own emptiness. Without an argument to sustain them, without a reaction to feed on, their ego begins to falter. They start to wonder why their words didn't land the way they expected, why their provocation didn't get the response they had hoped for. The doubt begins to creep in. Some will react with frustration, trying harder to get a rise out of you. They will escalate their words, their actions, their efforts, desperately seeking a crack in your resolve. But the more you withhold your reaction, the more powerless they become. They realize they are playing a game that only they are invested in, fighting a battle that you have already won simply by refusing to engage. In this way, silence is not passive. It is a calculated disruption. It removes the expected and replaces it with uncertainty. It forces people to face themselves instead of focusing on controlling others. The ones who rely on manipulation and confrontation will struggle in the absence of opposition because their sense of superiority is built on external reactions. Without it, they are left standing alone, their ego crumbling under the weight of their own unchallenged words. The moment you stop reacting, you take away their control. Those who rely on ego-driven dominance are not as powerful as they seem. They are only as strong as the reactions they provoke. Every time you argue back, explain yourself, or defend your position, you give them what they want, proof that their words have influence over you. But when you remain silent, you strip them of that control. You turn their own strategy against them, forcing them to question their power. People who thrive on conflict do so because it gives them a sense of superiority. They believe that by pushing the right buttons, they can make others bend to their will. But when you refuse to play their game, when you do not respond with anger, frustration, or even acknowledgement, you shatter their illusion of control. Without resistance, their attacks lose meaning. Without a reaction, their words become empty. Silence is an unexpected shift in power. It makes the other person uncomfortable because it denies them the engagement they expected. They may escalate their efforts, speaking louder, using harsher words, or pushing harder just to get a rise out of you. But the more they try and fail, the weaker they become. The more they demand a reaction and receive nothing, the more powerless they feel. In the end, silence forces them to face their own dependence on external validation. It reveals the insecurity behind their ego, the desperation behind their need for control. They are left standing alone in the battle they started, realizing too late that they were never in control to begin with. And when that realization dawns on them, their ego, once so inflated, so certain of its power, begins to collapse under its own weight. Victory does not always belong to the loudest voice or the most aggressive argument. The greatest battles are often won without a single word, without a fight, without even lifting a finger. Silence is the ultimate weapon because it does not just disarm, it dismantles. It leaves the other person with no target, no resistance, and no validation. When you refuse to engage, you force them to wrestle with their own emotions, their own insecurities, and their own ego. And in that struggle, they begin to unravel. Ego-driven individuals want control, but silence denies them that. They want to be seen as powerful, but silence exposes their weakness. They want to prove their superiority, but silence leaves them questioning themselves instead. The moment they realize that they cannot break you, that their words do not move you, that their provocations are met with nothing but indifference, the foundation of their ego begins to crack. Every person who seeks to challenge you expects a battle. They expect to engage in a war of words, to pull you into their chaos, to make you react so they can feel victorious. But when you do not respond, you change the game entirely. You show them that you are not on their level, that you are beyond their reach, that their attempts to control the situation have failed. Silence does not just end the conflict, it makes it irrelevant. It proves that their efforts were meaningless, their words powerless, their need for dominance futile. And that is when their ego truly breaks, when they are left standing alone, speaking into the emptiness, realizing that they never had power over you to begin with. In the end, silence is not just the absence of words, it is the presence of unshakable strength. It is the refusal to be controlled, the declaration that you are beyond provocation, beyond manipulation, beyond the reach of fragile egos seeking validation. When you master the power of silence, you no longer fight unnecessary battles. You no longer explain yourself to those who refuse to understand. You no longer allow the insecurities of others to dictate your emotions. Let them talk. Let them try. Let them wrestle with their own words in the emptiness you leave behind. Because the moment you stop engaging, the moment you remove yourself from the cycle of reaction, is the moment they begin to break under the weight of their own ego. And that is the moment you win, not by overpowering them, not by proving them wrong, but by showing them that their words, their actions, and their control have no hold over you. True power is not found in the noise of arguments, but in the quiet confidence of those who refuse to be moved.